This is Make It Mentionable. I'm Alyssa Patmos, and this is the show about being human in a world that encourages us to be robots. I invite you to join me as we journey through the mess, the magic, and the mania in between, because what we can talk about, we can manage. This honest conversation extravaganza includes free-flowing conversations and high doses of vulnerability to remind you that you aren't alone. No topic is off limits, and episodes are designed to leave you smarter, aka more self-aware than when you came. I am so glad you're here. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Make It Mentionable. I'm your host, Alyssa Patmos, and today I am here with Chris Ward, who is a friend of mine, and I feel like I get to say that line so many times, but I have super interesting friends, and I love getting to record our conversations and share them because they have such rich stories, and Chris definitely falls into that bucket. So I'm excited for you to hear more from him. Chris, thank you for being here today.
It's an honor, Alyssa. Thank you very much.
And we're going to talk about systems and broken systems and the future in different ways. So stick around for this conversation because Chris weaves together a very interesting military history, an activist perspective, and a huge dreamer futurist perspective that has blown my mind many times, and I can't wait to dive into it. So aside from me describing you in that way, Chris, what else do people need to know? Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, I'm about as typical a Midwestern boy as they come. I was born in a small town in Iowa, raised in Missouri to parents who divorced when I was very young. And there was very little as far as inspiration from the Midwest, but for some reason I knew that I was always different. Having been raised on the farm, I remember back when they would go and harvest the corn and we'd have these clear fields. And I really loved that time of the year because it was still kind of warm out, late fall, where I could go out, lay down in the field and have a complete, open peripheral vision of the night sky and stare up into the stars. And I even remember some of my earliest childhood memories laying there on the ground and imagining a child laying on some other planet looking back at me. And this was before I understood that there were even planets in the solar system. And I always kind of knew growing up that the systems that we lived in just didn't feel right. You know, there was never a city that I lived in that I was like, oh, this is home. I feel like, this is where I belong. Still today, I've been in Denver for 8 or 9 years and still kind of feel like this isn't right. Mm-hmm. And, growing up in the small town, there was very little there for opportunity. So my one-way ticket out of Dodge was to join the Army. Mm. And I just really needed a buffer because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do with my life. So my senior year in high school, I joined the Army. And my first duty station was Korea, which was completely polar opposite of the life that I had lived up to that point. But I did 11 years in the Army and still found myself upset with the United States as a whole, but especially their military presence in countries around the world. And so I decided to get out, but I was naive because I thought that my military background and experience would walk me into some 6-figure position somewhere. And so I started applying for jobs here, there, and everywhere that last year I was in the service, and found out that the only people that actually called me for an interview were the local British pub in Monterey, California, to check IDs at the door for $11 an hour. So I was like, well, not that there's anything wrong with that job, but I'm like, I think my experience lends itself to a little bit more than that. So I was forced into entrepreneurship, started back in 2007 with a video production company and jazz record label. Not too long after that, introduced to PPLSI, the company I've been with now for 14 years. And as you had mentioned, my military experience and just community activism rose out of leaving the military. And now I recognize that, a lot of the problems that I saw throughout my time overseas, that we actually have had solutions for decades. We just have never implemented them. And so now, as a part of my activism and my business kind of pursuits, I've decided to incorporate some of those systems and to impact our communities. That brings us up to today.
I love it. So we live in a world rife with systems, because systems put boxes around the way that we think. And then it becomes, okay, we don't have to think about this then. Things are certain. We have control. Everything is fine, except for when the system is not fine. And that's what we're seeing over and over and over again, whether it be healthcare. Our healthcare system is massively broken. Certain things with housing and the amount of people who are on the streets and what's available. Things are broken in our mental health care system. And then I don't have as much knowledge on the military system, but you do. And I've been in conversations with you around how broken that is. And so there is so much power in a system, except for when the system is no longer willing to experience new ways of thinking. And that's one of my favorite things about you as a human and the way that you think about these systems. And it's not even purely from this like idealistic perspective. It's rife with experience. And so for people tuning in, what are some of the problems you noticed? I think it's good to ground it in what are the things that you saw that led to how you've started shaping what's to come, which we'll talk about in a second. But first, what are some of the problems that you saw?
Well, I think the big glaring one was the first one I recognized in the military was whenever I transitioned. So my first 8 years in military service in the Army were in combat arms. I was a cavalry scout, and my experience in Bosnia led me to decide to transition over into human intelligence collection. So HUMINT as the acronym. And what I discovered working in the intelligence community was that the United States was actually financing international terrorism and participating in weapons sales, not only to our friends, but globally to people that would use our very weapons against us. And I was kind of sickened by that we were so, the United States for the better part of basically 90+% of American history, we've been involved in some sort of conflict. But to find out that we're perpetuating conflict really disgusted me, because we're so quick to send young men and women to go off and fight for their country under the illusion that we're fighting for democracy and freedom and peace, when that was never their intentions to begin with. And that's why I left military service, because I did not want to be involved in an organization that's going to send men and women off to die for bullshit, for lack of a better word. And so that was a lot of it, was looking at the defense military or the industrial military complex, and the fact that we're selling these weapons and the bullets and the bombs and so on and so forth, and that this is just to hike up shareholders' investments was more so than we were never, our whole time in Afghanistan was never to stop the Taliban. It was to maintain the insecurity of the place so that we can maintain our military presence and justify going back to Congress every year to ask for more money.
So I want to dive into what connections you started making there. But first I want to address this point of course, we're going to have people tuning in who are skeptical, and they're like, wait, no way. This isn't what I was told about any of this. And I love when people get to claim their experience. I think all of us should do more of that and like not give a shit what other people think. And at the same time, critical thinking. I don't think we should just accept what one person says and take that as the Bible truth all the time. So for anyone who is listening, who is like, okay, that's interesting because you were there firsthand And yet this totally doesn't perfectly align with what I've been told or my belief system around this. Where would you tell them to start looking if they were curious?
Well, open source, the CIA has come out even as early as Vietnam talking about the Gulf of Tonkin incident, how it was absolutely a fraudulent event that was created by the State Department in order to garner U.S. support for our involvement in Vietnam. And the CIA, former General McNamara, who joined the CIA, said this in the 90s, that this was an actual event that they made up entirely, that the Vietnamese warships attacked U.S. naval ships, and it was caught over signals intercept, and it was complete false. I mean, that event never took place. But we put that in the news, and the United States supported the conflict because prior to, we did not want to get involved in Vietnam because we saw what had happened to the French over there. But, and it led to the death of over 58,000 U.S. service members, which should have never had happened, because at the time, the Ho Chi Minh was actually, even though he was a communist leader, he was pro-United States. Like, he had no will towards us, but we had to make sure that we put an end to communism, which will always be the red devil that we use as an excuse for conflict because of what had happened in Korea against the Chinese. And then again, to lose, basically, a lot of people made the comparison between our withdrawal from Afghanistan, not too much unlike our withdrawal from Vietnam. It's like, listen, we've been here for so many years and we didn't really win. If anything, we lost because of the casualties, the human casualties of not just the United States, but the Afghan people. The destruction and the fact that this enemy, supposedly we've been fighting for over 20 years, gained control within minutes of our departure.
So when you were, thank you for clarifying some of that, because I always want, if someone is unsure, I want to give them a path to know, like, okay, where do I go look next? And this is also your experience and your story and your background. And so I want to know then, so you're in the military, you start making these connections, you decide to leave, and really, can repeat for me one more time, what was really the catalyst for you to decide to exit?
Well, it was, so part of my job, just to kind of break it down. So I was in Bosnia I was augmented to NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, as part of their human intelligence collection asset out of NATO headquarters in Sarajevo. And so a few of my responsibilities were to gather and collect information about the former Mujahideen fighters. So during the Balkan War, the United States was involved in the transportation of an estimated 8,000 Mujahideen fighters from the Middle Eastern states over in to offset the war in Yugoslavia against the Serbs, who had overpowered the Yugoslav area, just because 80% of the time the Yugoslavian army was comprised of Serbians. So to kind of offset that war and kind of make it more fair, they decided to ship in all these Mujahideen fighters who you'd know as the Taliban, the Al Qaeda, and a few other organizations. But whenever they signed the Dayton Peace Accords in 1995 and the war ended, part of the Dayton Peace Accords was that these Mujahideen fighters would return back to their home of origin. But there was no exit strategy for them. So we essentially just left them in Central Europe. And it's a direct contribution to the rise of Islamic extremism in Central Europe in the mid-90s. So we started seeing this in London and in Paris and in Barcelona and a few other cities. Direct contribution to that. So, but when I was working with, so there was several of these fighters, these Mujahideen fighters that had stuck behind. My job was to find out, who they are and what they're doing, and if they're a direct threat to, the people in Bosnia at the time. So I worked with several of these former Mujahideen fighters, and I talked to them about their origin and what they were doing, and to discover that they were working under U.S. payroll, and it wasn't directly like what the direct, the defense industry just paying them a check, but we'd created these corporations, these shell companies that would pay these Mujahideen fighters, but these were U.S. companies that were paying these former, not just Mujahideen, this is after the war. These are when they went on to continue to cause terrorist acts around the world that were on U.S. payroll to help basically shift America's mindset to now we have this global war on terror. And this kicked off, this was 2001, but we had to have an enemy. But we needed to be an enemy that would never go away. And so we kind of created Islamic fundamentalism and Islamic extremism as this new enemy. Because if you have one bad guy, Saddam Hussein is an example. When you take that bad guy out of the equation, the United States is like, hey, we won. The war is over. So they knew they had to have an enemy that didn't have, that we already had one face. We have, of course, Osama bin Laden, but we needed an entire enemy country that we couldn't really attack a country, and it had to be global. And Islam ended up being that enemy. But the fighters that I talked to were under U.S. payroll. And I was like, so we're perpetuating this international war on terror so that we have an enemy that we can justify going to war in these countries and dropping bombs and dropping, and shooting bullets. So,
and
so
what? Yeah. So, and thank you for sharing. So what did that do to you then? What did that spark in you, or what did that make you want to either do differently for your own life or from your activism perspective? What did that kick off for you?
Well, it compromises your belief in right and wrong. It compromises your trust in your own governments, in the way that things are going in the world theater right now. I liken it to any other belief system that we had growing up. I mean, I hate to sound immature, but when you think about being told by your parents that there's a Santa Claus and an Easter Bunny and a tooth fairy, and they hold out until it is ridiculous to even lead you on this path any further, then they tell you, and you're like, well, what else is not true? Well, this is where the institution of religions fall apart. They convince you that this is the truth up until past the point of insanity. And either adults like myself get off the train because they're like, okay, that's ridiculous, I'm not subscribing to that anymore. Or people just, they, kind of strap in and they just take it as, this is the truth, which all of us should know that there is no such thing as the truth. But this is where, when I looked at America and I was like, we're trying to spread democracy. And I was like, I think we use that as a kind of a word to, that it's not even, we've never been a democracy. And any historian will tell you, we've always been a republic. And we've never been a democracy. But we throw that word around so much as if we're going to defend this, even though there's really there's only a handful of countries that don't have a democracy right now. And we've never been at war with them. So it's just like Russia. We've always made them the Red Scare of communism, but we've never been at war with Russia ever in human history, except for the Cold War. But that was more of a propaganda war than it was anything else.
Right. So you have this perspective where you've lived in other places more than most Americans, and seen firsthand how what we're told doesn't match up with your personal experience. And then you mentioned it compromising your belief, because ultimately, it's convenient to go along with things that we're told until something shakes us. But if we're not looking or we don't question that from the beginning, then it's not guaranteed that something is ever going to shake us. And so this question, I'm assuming then from there, this questioning mentality was born.
It was always there. Like I said, growing up, I always kind of felt like we weren't living the way we were supposed to be living. We grew up, my parents saying that, as most, they fought over money, that there was always financial problems. I saw people that went bankrupt because of the healthcare system. I've seen people that faced homelessness, good friends of mine that lived in their cars. And there was just so many situations in people's lives that I'm like, why is this, and it wasn't until years ago, and this has probably been about 15 years ago, I was driving behind a car and I saw on a bumper sticker, it said, humans are the only species on earth that pay to live here. And my mind, it just blew up. And I was like, that is so right. I mean, it's very simple logic, but I was like, why is it that, we fight to live on a planet where everything else gets to live for free, and our quality of life is wholly dependent on our income. The amount of money is in direct relationship to the amount of options that we have. And that comes from where we live, what kind of education we get, what kind of food we eat. I mean, I have to talk to you about health, health and wellness, but we can see that the more povertous a family is, the worse their diet is, because they don't have access to healthy food. They're eating all processed foods from their local grocery store. If they have a local grocery store, it may be just a 7-Eleven, but yet you go to the wealthier side, they're eating very fresh foods, and locally resourced meats from farms, and the list goes on. I mean, you can take that into everything. Like I said, public education to private education, the safety and security of where you live, your homes. So,
well, and then there's the entire system of the American dream, where it's supposed to be you can be in any situation and rise to the top, and yet that's not the case. That's not how it goes. It's not a matter of sheer willpower.
No, everybody gets started off at a different place. I mean, we've already seen the statistics on if a child's uneducated or has uneducated parents or poor parents, they're more than likely to follow suit. I don't even know what the statistic it is. It's like 85% more likely to be uneducated and poor themselves. And it does. We're down to about 1%. I think it was an old talk that I heard from Earl Nightingale, where he said that the majority of us are dead or dead broke by the age of 65, and that less than 10% of us actually even reach a level of financial stability where we can fend for ourselves in our later years, where the majority are either dependent on Social Security or family for financial support. And the fact that people spend their entire lives working for a company or the government or whatever it is, to live check to check and not get to enjoy their golden years, to me, I think is a great tragedy of the human experience, where I believe, because I've been up the Eiffel Tower half a dozen times, I think everybody should be able to afford to go to Paris and run up the Eiffel Tower if they want to. I think that everybody should get an opportunity to crawl through the pyramids, and experience that kind of amazing history. But the fact that even travel is cost prohibitive for most people. Most people don't even get to see iconic buildings in their own state. So, yeah, all the systems.
And they're all interconnected. And money is a foundation of it, because money and currency is what connects like the global system. And big tech has fostered that even more, because never before have we been able to communicate so synchronously with people of other countries and have corporate operations run so smoothly. So with this, I'm always fascinated by when we make things the enemy, because it then positions it as a right way and a wrong way. And it positions it as, okay, well, you have to choose a side. But so very few things are that black and white. And if nothing else, I'm assuming your experience has taught you that. And so with this, so if capitalism is propped up as like this heroic thing where this is the best system, and then what would we say is the enemy of that? Are we saying it's socialism then?
No. To me, I think that there's not an enemy, like you just said. To me, there's not the problem is not that capitalism is bad. I love capitalism, and the more money I make, the more interest I have in making more money so that I can help more people with it.
Right.
I think that the challenges of capitalism are in the crevices that we don't necessarily pay attention to, because we understood under capitalism that everybody had the exact same right to win or lose. So if I decide to start a business, I'm taking on the risk that's inherent in starting a business. And I understand that if I don't succeed, that business will fail. And the challenge is that we've seen large industries like the pharmaceutical industry, like the defense industry, automotive industry, the airline. I mean, I can go down the list of large corporations that have either received a bailout or had legislation passed in order for a few people to be able to take advantage of these situations. As an example, direct correlation between our war in Afghanistan, because whenever we moved into Afghanistan back in 2001, 2002, I think it was, we had a 900% increase in the production of opium, because Afghanistan at the time was the largest producer of opium in the world. When we took over Afghanistan, that infinitely raised. And I talked to soldiers whose jobs it was to sit in Humvees and protect opium fields, just to sit around and patrol that nobody would set them on fire. At the exact same time, you see this epic rise in the opioid epidemic in the United States, because pharmaceutical companies had more affordable access to opiates and were prescribing them for things that shouldn't have been prescribed, and then over-prescribing them. You know, my mother, when she was going through cancer, had to turn around and fight opioid addiction as a part of that process. Not only is she going through chemo and radiation, now she's got to come off a drug addiction at the same time. And so this was one of those systems where the pharmaceutical industry was propped up by the defense industry as well in order to do that. Was that a byproduct of our being in Afghanistan, or was that part of the plan from the get-go? I have no idea, because I don't have access to that kind of information. But to see that, just like when we were going to bomb Syria the first time under Barack Obama, they had threatened that we were going to use the Tomahawk missiles. Well, the corporations, just under the threat of us going to war with Syria, the stock market for the companies that make Tomahawk missiles, the stocks skyrocketed those days. And so we see that with these companies that are poised to benefit massively because of situations going on in the world theater. However, the small businessman that doesn't have that kind of ability to basically, they call it the pay to play. There was a whole special about it, a documentary about the campaign finance rules, the way that special interests and large corporations were able to donate to get politicians who were indirectly turn around and writing and creating or signing legislation. They're probably not creating it, somebody's giving it to them. Legislation that directly benefits them. And it's called pay to play. And it's something that we've practiced throughout all of American history. We know it happens, but these same politicians we have today won't fight it because that's how they got into office in the first place. So there's very few on board, even though they'll say we need to reform campaign finance laws. They're not going to do it because that's how they got there in the first place. And they're not going to they're not going to sever the, or they're not going to, what do they, what's the word that, they're not going to sever the hand that
feeds them. Yeah. So, okay. So we have these systems that are abundantly broken, and regardless of which one it is, I can guarantee you that every person has experienced the brokenness of one of them in some form or fashion. And so it's always interesting, because then that's where things start to get a little hazy, because there are some people who want to go down the rabbit hole of why is this happening? And so they can look at it and it's like, well, everything's a conspiracy. And then that gives comfort in, okay, well, we just blame the people at the top. And then other people are like, okay, that's not as important. And they go down another rabbit hole and find something else to blame. And we end up with these divisive perspectives then, all trying to figure out the root and why it's happening. And one of the things that I enjoy about you as a person is, even through the despair of this, even through having, your mom going through cancer, and then also being at the effect of what opioids do, even having gone through living in certain areas and seeing the destruction that was caused by something you thought was supposed to be good, you maintain this level of hope in humanity. And I think at times, especially with the fear that's propagated around many different outlets, and that we're just naturally prone to buy into as a human, it can be so easy to devolve into that and to kind of spiral down, rather than choosing to have the hope and be like, okay, wait, yes, all of this is broken. And yet, what can we think about differently? And so then I go back to who you were as a child. And I love this, because like this creative genius was in you from the time you were young, where it was like, wait, these systems are weird. How can I dream bigger than this? And I think those are the stories we don't hear as often as, yes, we hear all the time how the things are broken, and who did what and who's doing what and how it's continued to be broken. And it can be very depressing. And so the flip side of it are these stories of, well, how do we think about this differently? Because I hold out hope that when enough people step into their true gifts and, choose to face the challenge and experience that gift, then we're here to serve other people. We're not just here to serve ourselves. And I think you embody that in a lot of the work that you do. So to turn this around into a more hopeful conversation, what are some of the things that you see or that you think about and ponder as different, as alternatives?
And I'm glad that we made that shift, because oftentimes it sounds like I'm a fatalist when I start discussing some of those topics. But the reality is that, again, we have solutions for every social ill that exists today. Mm. And so I saw this post just the other day. There was a gentleman that was complaining about Amazon, and he had said that he had ordered a product from Amazon and it missed its delivery date, and that there was, of course, supply chain issues. There's employee issues, and he was complaining about Amazon, that he had ordered something that didn't show up in the time frame that he had wanted, and was just kind of complaining about Amazon. And somebody said, he's like, what can we do about this? And somebody just responded, don't shop at Amazon. And I was like, that's as simple as it gets. I was like, we all have an individual commitment that if we see something that we don't like about our society or something that's going on, is that we have to be the model to say that. It's like, we have to go out and choose to be able to generate more revenue for ourselves. If it's like, hey, my job's not paying me enough, well, we understand multiple streams of income. If your job's not paying you enough and you can't abandon your job yet, find another way to generate additional revenue until that builds up past the point where you can leave your job. Mm-hmm. We know that. That's not, and yet some people aren't willing to take that on. Mm-hmm. Health and wellness. You don't have to be able to afford a health coach when all access to all information is available to us online. I can take a yoga class through YouTube for free every morning if I want to. Mm-hmm. It's not free. I'm still paying for the internet. But food items, I can go out and make sure that I choose healthy produce that's affordable, and about, making sure that all the food in the house that I'm feeding my family with is all nutritious food. And I'm not just stockpiling processed foods and all the garbage that they have available for us in the stores. So it's our personal responsibilities to do that. So that's what we looked at in the construction industry. It was after Hurricane Maria. And I saw that 80% of Puerto Rico had got cut off from public utility. I mean, all public utility, electricity, water, the whole 9 yards. And I said, well, why was that? Because the storm didn't hit the whole island, just hit one portion of it. What I come to find out is there's only one company that runs all public utility in Puerto Rico, which we know right out of the gate is a monopoly. It happens here in the continental United States as well, but we don't call it a monopoly. But all these companies have agreed to cover certain areas. So you don't get to choose which electrical company when you move into your place. You're just going to get billed by Excel or whatever. What have you. They've all come to that agreement.
Right.
So it is a monopoly, but it's not, because they kind of agreed to cover it. So what I said was, well, okay, that happened first. And then why the homes were devastated. I mean, they were completely destroyed by, of course, and it was a hurricane. But I knew that we already had buildings strong enough to withstand hurricanes. Like, that technology already existed. So that's why over years, I'm talking about the better part of, 2017. So yeah, almost a little over, and now it's 2021. So what is that, 5 years? And I said, you know what, I'm not going to wait around, because I know the fact that we have a technology in place where we can build very affordable homes for individuals and families that can withstand Category 5 hurricanes and are also self-sufficient, meaning they're still plugged into public utility if they need to be. But if they're cut off from public utility, they will not lose electricity and water. And so when I said these technologies exist, and I went out into the marketplace and started talking to people about it, they didn't even know. Like, they had never heard of 3D printer technology, that we can now 3D print a house. The research and development on that's over 10 years old, and solar. People still say, well, solar's too expensive. It's cheaper just to have natural gas. It hasn't been more expensive in years. We reached cost parity between gas and solar 5, 6, 7 years ago as such. Now, not every home is built for solar. That is a true story. But the fact that solar costs more is an absurdity now. And we've gotten to the point where anytime you have to burn anything for energy, whether that be coal, wood, natural gas, oil, anything like that, that is an antiquated technology. You might as well be a caveman, because we're past all of those. We never have to burn anything ever again for energy. And we continue to do so because the companies that built our country, steel, oil and gas, so on and so forth, they created a system that we just told ourselves that we can't do anything without oil. And the fact that people still believe that, and they will fight vehemently. I've had very difficult discussions with people in oil and gas about the future of their industry. Some of them realize that the writing's on the wall, that it's a dying industry. And the fact that they're still trying to save coal companies, coal. I'm like, I'm amazed when the last administration told states out on the East Coast that we were going to bring coal back. I was mortified.
Yeah.
That'd be like telling somebody, I'm going to bring back the 8-track player. They'd be like, well, 1, what's an 8-track player? And 2, why are we bringing that back when we have Spotify? It doesn't make sense to the normal consumer, but some people, that was one of those systems that they cannot let go of.
So part of the thing with systems, though, is that they provide their intention is to provide a direct benefit. We don't have to think about certain things, and we can go off and be creative in other areas. And so there's a level of convenience that is accepted and then wanted within any sort of system, and people end up making sacrifices for that. And so to evolve a system requires enough people to be interested in changing it, but change and convenience are sometimes at odds. And so having seen in your work with terrorism, in your work in activism, you've seen the extremes of human behavior. And so where are you at in your thought process around what it actually takes to get enough people to change a system?
Well, I don't think we're going to get, I hear Christian fundamentalists talk about the concern of a global monetary system because that's a sign of the apocalypse, which I absolutely do not believe in. But that gives a good light to an understanding is that the whole world will never subscribe to a universal monetary system. The same way you can't get the whole world to subscribe to democracy or religion. We have some countries out there that are 100%, well, close to 100% Islamic. And we have other countries that are like the United States, that are like America, I think is 70% Christian. So on and so forth. So this idea that we're going to have a global economy or a global religion, anything like that, is just nonsense to even engage in that discussion. What I looked at, what we could do is that in order for a system to be fixed, we really have to let it die and replace it with something that is, I think, more sustainable. So I live in the city of Denver. I look at the infrastructure for the city of Denver. The road systems, the energy systems that we have here, were never supposed to sustain the number of people. We now have 2.5 million people living in the Denver metro area. It was never built to hold that many people. So we build these massive apartment complexes to try to put more and more people in a smaller space. But now we're just taxing the infrastructure more so than it was ever had in its history. It doesn't work. So what I'm doing is that creating a new city. So I want to build a new city where the infrastructure was built with the end in mind. So it's only going to sustain, my plan is 20,000 people. So the roads, the energy, the water, everything will only be there for over 20,000 people. And once, of course, I'm not going to cut it off exactly at 20,000, but roughly 20,000 people. And then we can move on to another city if that, because we don't want to overtax that. Automated transportation. We know that automated transportation systems are infinitely more sufficient, more energy sufficient, more time sufficient, the whole 9 yards. And yet we can't implement them in traditional cities because we still have the majority of drivers are fallible drivers. They're either, we know that accidents are caused by they're not paying attention. They may be under the influence of drugs and alcohol. They may be tired. And the problem with everybody driving their own cars is that we don't know what is going on in everybody else's minds. When we have an automated transportation system, I can tell inside the city, every vehicle knows what every other vehicle is doing. So in the event that I need to move an emergency vehicle down a road, I can get all the cars to pull over unanimously while emergency vehicles pass by. You can't do that here. Because I've looked around and I have no idea where the noise is coming from. I can hear the sirens.
Right.
I'm looking around, I'm like, I don't see any lights. I don't even know where that car, where the emergency vehicle is coming from. So that's why we don't have automated transportation. The technology already exists. We just can't put them. I talked to engineers who said, we already have flying cars, but we're never going to put a human behind a flying car to operate that vehicle independent. They said, once we have full automation, now we can talk about automated cars. And I was like, that's interesting. Like I grew up on the Jetsons. So we should have already been flying, been in flying cars, but they will never put us as an individual driver behind a flying car until it's automated.
And I think this demonstrates the power of I'm going to go with creativity, because I have never pondered these questions in my life. I'm not like, oh, let me go seek out who has created a flying car because I need that in my life. Like, I'm obsessed with the social sciences and human behavior. And like, I want to dive into the psychology of it. And that is the path it's taken me. And so there is a piece of how you talk about things, and I want to move. We're shifting there, and I want to continue that. We talked about the pain. We talked about the depressing stuff, bringing awareness to yet again what is broken, and then kind of orienting like we can have hope because these solutions are here. The solutions are not absent. It's not impossible. It's not an insurmountable challenge. And then painting the picture of the future, because I think that holds so much power. Sometimes when you can even go beyond the practical to like, really, if we were really dreaming, what is this huge picture of the future? It's enough to spark something to start shifting. And so I can hear you starting to go there. But first, I just want to address, like, for anyone listening, this is the value of individual interest. Like, I focus on relationships because I believe that when we get our individual needs met, we are way more likely to go out and help others. Unfortunately, I think sometimes we try to jump ahead and we just want to serve others without actually addressing what we need. And so resentment just grows and it gets conflict oriented and troublesome. But I firmly believe that someone who is having their needs met does not want to just exist in isolation. We are a collective species. We're meant to be in connection with each other. Our brain patterns need co-regulation. And so when we can get to the point where we're getting our needs met, we're in touch with our gifts, I firmly believe that we go out there and use them in creative ways. And so my piece of this is like, how do we make relationships better? Because that makes you more stable as a person. And then we all benefit from that. So for you, I just freaking love hearing your passion for things like this that my mind doesn't normally think about. And that's the beauty of it. We all don't have to have the same thing. We don't all have to be an activist in every single area. But I do want to support you in your vision of it. And I want to know more about it. And I think this is where painting the picture for people who haven't thought about it to start just being like, oh, do things have to be the way that they always are? And that to me is like the greatest thing. Like when it can just be a small shift into, I guess it doesn't need to be like that. So can you start painting a picture for us of what a more sustainable future is? I have heard you talk more local and smaller communities, which seems to be the antithesis of what we've been doing for the past, 4 decades, which is just trying to go bigger and more global. I'm almost hearing you going back to going more local and smaller and focused. So what does it look like?
Well, I mean, I'd like to start just where you talked about as far as relationships and mental health and wellness first, because I believe that a lot of the social ills we see today with depression, drug addiction, any addictions, as a matter of fact, homelessness, it stems from the fact that our system does not allow people to pursue their passions. And we have not had those conversations as far as honesty is concerned, because we've created this artificial way of being. And we've all tried to, and we've seen this I remember back in the 80s when they had lifestyles of the rich and famous. So you had people who had this vision of what success looked like. And it was always the sports cars with the mansion and the good looking man or woman on your arm. And we created this artificial look at what success was. And a lot of people in pursuit of that fell short and started being, they had American greed, couples or individuals that were actually, breaking the law in order to facilitate the facade that they were successful, as if that's true happiness was what that was. And so in there lies the challenges, is that if we were to get back to, let's look at societies around the world where happiness does persist, and what are their qualities of life like? And you see a lot more agrarian areas where people are spending time in the fields, not because they need to make a dollar, but because their connection with Mother Earth, which is something that we have severed ourselves from for so long, that even mentioning to people about going out and playing in the woods would make their skin crawl. Mm-hmm. They'd be like, I don't like the cold, I don't like bugs, I don't like wind, I don't like the sun, and I think that when we talk about moving forward, we got to look back at that as what is going to make us happier. Mm-hmm. And we'll see a shift in the economy and there's already some people talking about getting more people to pursue their passions, mm-hmm. but they're like, well, I don't know how to monetize the passion. And this has been really difficult for a lot of people because they're really passionate about something. They're like, how do I monetize that? And they're scared of taking the risk of starting their own business. And some people even quit their jobs way too soon because mm-hmm. they're like, screw this, I'm not going to live this way anymore. I'm going to go start my business doing this. I'm like, but you don't know how to do that. I'm not going to quit my job and become a jazz band trumpet player because I was like, I don't know. No, I do know jazz, but I would never get paid to play jazz.
Well, and not every passion has to be monetized. I do think that's an interesting point because we are looking for a way out of the corporate system in some regards. There are elements of the corporate system. I've said this over and over. I hate demonizing the corporate system. It's safety and security is great, and it's needed for so many people. And most organizations do not foster people being used at their highest potential. So that piece of it, we end up in this place where people aren't being used for their creativity and their true inner essence and purpose. And so then to get out of that, because it looks like the only solution is, I have to go start something on my own and I have to monetize it. And then that adds a whole other pressure to the purpose. But for me, I love cooking. You know this, you've had my food. And for me, I've intentionally been like, I'm not monetizing this. Like, it is a passion. I want to nourish people with it. I love having people over, but I don't want to monetize it because I don't want that added pressure there. So I just think that that's an important distinction, but I want you to keep going with what this looks like and the importance of people pursuing their passion. So people have started talking about that. And then what else?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Is getting people, to figure out what they're passionate about. Mm-hmm. Because I think that even just lends itself to people living longer and living healthier, mm-hmm. is if they have a sense of purpose, mm-hmm. and a sense of contribution. Mm-hmm. And we're seeing this shift now in a monetary economic system. So we've dealt from a centralized banking system where we go out and make money and then use that for the exchange of goods and services. Well, now we're moving into, and it's often demonized, as a decentralized banking system where you look at your cryptocurrencies, mm-hmm. which I believe wholeheartedly that because we've all agreed, that's like you said, the system presents itself because all of us come to an agreement that this is the system we're going to operate in. We all use US dollars because we all agree that it is worth fill in the blank. It's kind of worthless, but we've agreed that if I give you $1, it's worth $1 US. Mm-hmm. We've come to agreement. However, the valuation of that currency has nothing to do with us. It has to do with outside factors, where in a decentralized banking system, now the currency is valuated by its users. So we put X amount of currency into population. There's only X amount of Bitcoin. There won't be any more than that. So depending on how people are using Bitcoin and trading it creates that value. And we see it rise and fall so aggressively because we haven't put the systems in place to control it like we have with the US dollar. Mm-hmm. We have the Securities and Exchange Commission, so on and so forth. So we're still really volatile. It's still kind of the Wild West, even though it's been around for I think close to almost 2 decades now. It's still very volatile, and we can see rises and falls in the value of currency, and fortunes have been won and lost, just as we've seen in the last 2 months. But we're going to go further than that. And this is what scares people is that now we're going to move from eventually, this is what I call Star Trek economics, where we're going to transition from decentralized banking system to a resource-based economy. And to me, that will be the best that I can foresee evolution of our society, because now we're talking about an equitable distribution of resources. And it's not socialism, it's not communism, it's a whole other system outside. Because socialism and communism, besides the fact that people think that they're evil words, are still economic systems. You know, and they fit well in the place that they do, as much as people demonize it. In Vietnam, 90% agrarian society. What happens when a farmer's crops are destroyed? They don't eat. So in a communist state, though, regardless of way a farmer's yield turns out, they're still taken care of. So they don't have to worry about that. Now, they're not living, you know, a very luxurious lifestyle that is promised through capitalism. However, people are protected. Where in the United States, you can lose your fortune in a heartbeat. And typically, people that already had a fortune are well enough trained to be able to regain a fortune in short order. But
I think I want to ask one point, because I know where you're going with in the Star Trek economy. And every time we talk about this, I get a little bit more of my head wrapped around it. And I want people to hear what you think that is. But from my own experience in hearing about it, I think it might be helpful to talk about materialism first, because it's really hard to talk about capitalism without talking about materialism. If you truly look at what's going on and how the system operates in our country, I mean, you have a craft store that has candy bars all along the edge of it. And it is a perpetuation of, you need this, you need that. We're bombarded with ads everywhere we look. Content creators like you and I post on social media and make the social media companies money because people like the stuff we've created, and we give them data sets. Tara McMullen made an Instagram post brilliantly about that recently, explaining the invisible labor that is then making big tech money. And so we live in this world where it's constantly perpetuated, where we need more, and that will bring more happiness. And so I think one of the fundamental shifts, and I see this starting to die away because it's completely unsustainable to think that more things equal more happiness. And so you mentioned, you got to wait for the old system to die away. And we see ripples of that, thank goodness, because it's not more things make you more happy. Not at all. And so for you, how do you start to reframe thoughts around materialism and needing more? Because I think that will help bridge to resource-based economy, like you talk about.
Well, and we have to go back to the end of, I would say, after World War II, where we had the nuclear family, where everybody. This was when we were as common folk as humanly possible, where there was one of the members of the household was fully employed while the other one was stay at home. Mm-hmm. For the most part, it was the woman at that time. They had 2, maybe 3 children. Everybody's house almost looked identical. It was so cookie cutter. Everybody had the same cars, and it didn't cost you more than a month's, maybe a couple months' salary to go ahead and buy a brand new car. Nowadays, it could cost you a month's salary to replace your bumper. So when we've looked at this now, and I saw this, what happened when they decided what was luxury and what was not. So De Beers is one of those organizations that we can blame for what happened in the diamond industry, because they were the ones that made diamonds are not rare. If anything, it's one of the most abundant minerals on the planet. We use it for drill heads. I mean, we use it for tools. Diamonds are so abundant, but we made the consumer base believe that this was a rare gem, and we made it so costly that it's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Look at the markup on perfume as an example. The name on a perfume bottle will infinitely change the cost of the perfume. There is nothing in that bottle that's rare. Nothing. But we will pay hundreds of dollars to have access because somebody told us that this is a luxury item. Mm-hmm. The same way with cars. You know, they're made of the same materials that every other car is made out of. It's not like this car is made out of gold and this one's made out of coal. You know, all the cars are basically made of the same materials now. But the name on the car, now granted, some cars do look more aesthetically pleasing than others, but the reality is that the cost of production really is the exact same for any automobile. And we've even seen car companies like Lincoln and Ford that now are making each other's car parts and so on and so forth. But I'm losing my train of thought. Materialism.
Poking holes.
The part of what we believe is happiness and our pursuits of success was that in order for me to feel that I have reached a certain place in my life is that I have that home in that community where the rich live. Mm-hmm. You know, that I'm driving that sports car, you know, that my car was $150,000 Tesla, as an example. I love Tesla. There's nothing wrong with Tesla, but my clothes, you know, that I'm getting them, you know, that I'm not just going down to the store and buying a suit. It has to be hand tailored by this particular company so that I'm wearing thousands of dollars in a suit, as an example. And I have hand tailored suits. So, I mean, it's hypocrisy, but that's a part of that material, like you said, that me feeling better about myself is tied into the things that I own. The problem is that we are such consumers that sense of pride or success and that joy that it gives us is so temporary that we have to run right back out and do it again. This is why the people you see that are just shopping on Amazon, like it's going out of style. I have friends of mine that there's not a day I don't show up that they don't have a new Amazon package. I'm like, what do you need that you have that many Amazon packages coming to your door? Like, I can't possibly comprehend what that's about. I've had people buy furniture for houses that don't even exist yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, were they at least on sale? Was there a sale being run?
No, they wanted to pay top price because they wanted, when people come over to their house, that they see they have that brand of furniture in their house.
See, I understand the perspective. Like, if you're going to go to a hand-tailored suit, and this to get a hand-tailored suit or a bespoke suit, there are pieces of that make sense to me, because if that is truly someone's purpose and they love working with fabric and they love crafting and creating something, I will pay more money for that. But it's not about the label then. It's about, am I spending money? Am I choosing to exchange energy with someone who is doing something that they truly like, and I'm supporting that person? Or am I supporting this brand that is going to make billions of dollars, whether I give them another 10 of mine or not? And to me, there's a distinction there in the connection to the goods that we're purchasing. And so in your picture of the future, how does our relationship with things change? Because I think sometimes people get worried, like we're so conditioned to think that we need things and we need the nice things, that people have a resistance to new ways of being in the future because they feel like they have to give that up, which is what we've been conditioned to work for our entire lives. So how do we bridge that? What do you envision around these things?
I think that transitioning into a new community gives us the opportunity to educate people on what it is exactly, the difference between wants and needs. And now we can say, listen, whenever in this new community, the way I envision it is that when you go into the grocery store, your produce is grown in the grocery store. All of the food that's produced, that's sold in the grocery store, comes from the community. We're not shipping it in from anywhere else. It's all provided there locally, including your meats and vegetables and fruits and everything else. But now what I've done is I'm truly creating a consumer protection act, because I'm only providing things that are healthy and nutritious for the people in my community. So I think that's what the true Consumer Protection Act should actually be about. I can't tell you not to drive a car. That is your that is your privilege to be able to drive a car. You still have to go out and get licensed and get insured and all that 9 yards. What I'm saying is, in my community, you will not be able to drive your own personally owned vehicle. I will not take it away from you. You can leave it in our storage facility outside of the city limits. So if you feel inclined to go jump in your car and go drive through the mountains, do it. I love driving myself, but in this community, we don't need that, because we're trying to cut down on fatalities. We're trying to increase energy efficiency and time efficiency, because Denver is horrible when you sit on the highway, but look at cities like Mumbai, where it's bumper to bumper traffic, and the geographical plane of which those people sit, like 50 million people live in Mumbai. The human capital that's wasted of people just sitting on the highway waiting to get from point A to point B, which is only a few miles anyway. I'll never forget, I was down in southern Denver one day going to a meeting, and I was driving all of maybe 5 miles, and it took me 45 minutes to get there. 45 minutes to drive 5 miles. Mm-hmm. So look at what I was unable to accomplish because I had to be attentive in my vehicle. Mm-hmm. You know, in an automated vehicle, I can sit in traffic because I could just sit in the car and work on other things. I could be productive. There's not the waste of human capital unless my job is like construction, or I'm a doctor where my hands physically have to be on something or someone else. And so I think educating people in this process that there's not going to be, they're not losing anything, that we're just changing the way that they live their lives, that I think long term we'll see a massive increase in happiness and their sense of contribution and so on and so forth. So that's where I see these smaller communities, because they're easier to manage.
Mm-hmm. And then they're living, and then that's operating within the bigger systems that are currently broken.
Absolutely. But it's still a monetary economic system. Mm-hmm. They're still going to be traveling to and fro. Mm-hmm. Every once in a while I bring it up. People think it's like a hippie commune or some religious cult that is. Mm-hmm. I'm like, no, there's no.
I think that's
operating the same systems.
I think that's the hardest part, is because the alternative ways that we've seen thus far are so extreme in terms of like, okay, I'm going to wear white flowing robes and I am going to have long hair and I have to like want to sing Kumbaya all the time. Like, that's not everyone's version of success. Just like having the car doesn't need to be everyone's version of success. But so far, that's the only picture that has truly been painted for us at a large scale of what alternatives can be. And so that's why I love having this conversation to hear a different one. So
they've got to be subtle, because we can't, people are not going to start growing their own gardens from home because we think that that's a great idea, that everybody should have their own home garden. Mm-hmm. So we have to look at what are people's normal inclinations, but there's other things that we need to normalize, like preventative medicine, you know, in both the physical body and in the mental, you know, and making sure that people is like, listen, we need to be talking to counselors, you know, and therapists long before that it becomes a serious issue. Mm-hmm. And once you get accustomed to having honest conversations with a therapist or whatever, anybody, now you can normalize having those honest conversations with each and everybody, or each and every person. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lot of the challenges that like you just said, in relationships. You know, there's so much miscommunication, you know, because people don't want to talk about what's really going on inside of them because they're afraid of what the other person may think of them, or they don't want to be offensive, or fill in the blank, you know? And I'm like, if you can have an honest conversation with somebody about a problem going on in your life, now you can, you know, without judgment, you can go talk about, you know, how can we, you know, what can we do to make things better?
Yeah. I mean, talk about systems. The way that we paint pictures of relationships are terrible. So similarly, I'm constantly having to paint pictures of what a relationship can be, because we've been given so many messages of what it should be or what it is for most people, but that doesn't mean we have to accept that. It doesn't mean that's how it has to be. So I have two things that I want to ask you based on on what you've said in the past few minutes. So the first is, how long do you think it would take for someone to experience the benefits of a type of community like this? And the reason I ask is because I'm wondering, like, I'm almost like, does there need to be some sort of like, I don't know, almost like I don't want to say resort because that paints the luxury perspective. I'm not trying to do that. So more like this, like experiential version where before it's like, hey, I'm going to commit to this and this is now my lifestyle. Can people go and experience it? Because I feel like sometimes they're not going to get it until it's there. And so how long would they need to be there, do you think?
And that's going to depend on how ingrained a person's belief systems are. Mm-hmm. And then if someone's willing, I mean, we've seen this time and time again, where even short exposure to other ideas, where somebody just say, we're just asking to be open mm-hmm. to certain ideas. And they're not revolutionary. Nothing that I'm creating doesn't already exist. That's, some of my investors that I've spoke with, they're like, well, where's the intellectual property rights on this? I'm like, well, there are no intellectual property because nothing I'm bringing out is new technology. These are all existing systems. But if I were to bring somebody in, this is like in Oroville, as an example, in India, you're allowed to go there. So they have a visitor center, and inside the community of Oroville, they don't use money. They have no monetary system inside of Oroville, except for guests. So the people that live in Oroville can make clothes, they make jewelry, they make art, they make everything. Then they can sell that to the outside world who comes to visit for money that's used to benefit the community, or whatever, or they put it in a bank account, depending on whichever one they want to do. But that allows me, as somebody that's like, okay, let me come in and let me talk to some of the citizens about how this is adversely impact them. Like, are they miserable? Are they hating life? Or are they truly happy? And being in Oroville and talking to engineers and architects who have abandoned the traditional life to live in a resource-based economy, and they're like, they've never been happier because now they can fulfill their artistic visions. They're not limited by HOAs and such that they can do. So I think you're right. Some people will need to be able to have the opportunity to feel these systems. We wanted to build a model house just so people could stay in the house, just to feel what that feels like, mm-hmm. to live in a smart home. Mm-hmm. And when people hear smart homes, they think of like traditionally what we have now is like, hey,
Alexa everywhere.
Yeah, Alexa, play soft jazz. That's not a smart home. A smart home is actually just measuring the amount of water and energy that's being consumed inside the household and saying, hey, where can we make this more sustainable? Where are we losing energy? Where are we losing water that we shouldn't be? And being able to tell you specifically where in the house there's waste. That way we can stop that, close off those leaks, because right now, most houses, HVAC is being the number one. And because we don't have a good system to control heating and cooling in places, and we're weird creatures. We want it cool in our house during the summer, and we want it hot in the house during the winter. So, because we're just weird creatures as it is. But that's a lot of energy that's wasted because of HVAC, and we'll leave it. I've seen people, they don't turn it off. They leave all day long, and the heater's still running for nobody.
Mm-hmm. So is it, in the vision of this, is it, I got to figure out which direction I'm going to go, because I have two. Okay, here. So is it almost like then there can be different versions of these communities? So you said the one you're envisioning as like the prototype of it, patient zero of communities, is 20,000 people. So is the goal then that there can be different communities where the same goal is on sustainability, but maybe there are some that have different thought principles, or is it you can get along better with people over there? Is the goal to where it's almost I don't want to say tribal because the principles aren't tribal, but in the sense that you're then engaging in trade with other communities where it's like the other community becomes the guest that then has some sort of currency or energy exchange that you trade with.
Absolutely. Because so this is all about marrying the community with its environment. And every environment's going to have different energy needs. They're going to have different access to resources. You're going to have some communities that are abundant in water, and then you're going to have others that are very arid and are going to require more water. Then you're going to get into places that are more deciduous. Then you have places that are more jungle. And so the communities are going to need to be married to the environment that they're in. But the cities are also built by their inhabitants. The community and the culture of that community is going to be based on the people inside that. So you can't be rigid to say, here, we're going to cookie cutter this city here, and we're going to do it in Florida, and we're going to do it in Japan, and we're going to do it in Australia, because every place is going to be different, and their needs are going to be different, and the culture is going to be different, and the fact that but trade will exist because we can say, hey, we're abundant in this resource here. We need what you have. Let's now trade, and we create that system of trade. That was the vision of Jacques Fresco, who was the founder of the Venus Project. And he passed away a number of years ago at the age of 101, but he had that idea of the resource distribution being equitable amongst all communities. But again, he saw this as a global social change. And my challenge is that there's no way we can get that global social change because we can't get people to agree on anything.
That was my other question is like, so this has to operate within our larger systems, which could imply that regulation comes down on what that city is able to do and not do. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. So
the laws of the land, you're looking at federal laws will still apply. There are systems that you can put, just like, what's the word I'm looking for?
Like almost like, are you going the vein of like certain religious protections, but there's like,
no, well, I mean, it's religious protection is always going to be there. Under the United States, your religious protection falls under your First Amendment. So we still have to.
You can ignore me. What were you going to say around? So federal laws still apply, and then you were going to say, but we can.
Yeah. So the communities can be structured in ways that are unconventional. So the way that we're looking at, in particular, this project Canvas to do in Colorado, if it happens in Colorado, is that there's no mayoral office. So there's no city council. As a matter of fact, that the city administration is run on artificial intelligence. And so because these systems in most cities right now, honestly, are run by computers. We don't think of it because we have a mayor's office, we have city council, but they're not the ones that are monitoring the emergency systems and the water and the electricity and everything else. That's all run by computers. And that's what this artificial intelligence system that's already been created. I'm not creating anything new. These systems are already created to run the cities, and you will still have a democratic process, but you'll have access through your home. Because I know that, Alyssa, you live in your house, and here's something that we're going to vote on as a community. We'd love to hear your thoughts, and boom, you vote. And then we make a judgment. So that's better democracy, because now we're giving everybody access to be able to vote. It's not, typically, as we see now, there's a lot of voter suppression acts that are implemented to keep certain people from voting. We've talked about, and that's a whole caveat, that's a whole other direction in of itself. But there's these systems that we can implement so that it's better for everybody.
So that leads me to another question I wanted to ask you, because I feel like this is something that comes up in a lot of ways. The alternate models of the future or alternate models of living that we see now, it's almost like it's a privilege. Like it's something where once you make enough money, it's like, okay, go off, buy an island. You can create whatever culture you want, So in this model, is it something that is a privilege or is it open to anyone?
It's open to anyone. Yeah, there's no privilege. Essentially living in the city, you just have to agree to living in this type of a community, that you're not going to drive your car down the street, but there's going to be other things that we're going to have access to, or is like education, the best education that we have available to every level, that it won't matter how much money you make, that your children will have access to the same education that everybody else will, which we do now. We just don't implement it.
Right. So the thing with change, always, the thing with people who think outside the box is that it's a threat to the current system. And that's what we've seen over and over again. Anytime someone comes out to try and change the way of thinking, even if you go back to ancient astronomers, like connecting back to the stars, like Galileo being on the fringe of what was going on, and being demonized for it in a lot of ways. So how do you think about addressing the fact that in many ways, this poses a threat to the people in power in our traditional current system?
Well, it absolutely does, because people that have garnered power through wealth, the challenge is that when you disrupt that system, if let's just say complete monetary economic collapse, then all their money is for naught. It's not worth anything. So they've essentially lost their power. So they do challenge it. We saw stories like Nikola Tesla, whose promise of free energy for all directly resulted in the fact that he died penniless and alone, because the electric companies, in the oil and gas industry could not envision a future where energy was free, because where are they going to get their profits from if they don't control our energy source? And we know that inherently. I don't think it's inherent. I think that if people understood the fact that access to free energy completely destroys almost every system, and that's how much they're going to vehemently defend the existing systems, because just like luxury items, it's not a luxury item if everybody has access to it. It's only luxury if it's allocated to the very few and the privileged. That's what makes it a luxury item. If everybody was driving a Ferrari, it would cease to be a luxury automobile. And that goes the same with everybody, with everything. And so now the profit margins, because if something is no longer a luxury item and everybody has access to it, that means that everybody has that can afford it. So everybody is able to pay the same price for the same product or service. Well, now your profit margin has been diminished, and you can't live the lifestyle that you wanted to because you can't afford your $100,000 a year golf membership, or your private jets, and the list goes on. And I don't demonize that at all. If somebody said, "Hey, Chris, you want a private jet? I'll pay for it," I would accept it tomorrow.
Yeah,
I'd be like, "Yeah, when can we fuel the jet? I'll be there." It's not to demonize all that, but we also, as a part of when you study economics, you also realize that we also had a moral obligation at the beginning of that process, is that there would never be, people wouldn't be taken advantage of, that it would not destroy flora and fauna, and that it would be fair and just. And the problem is that we implemented so many systems that are opposite of that. We've sold products and services that destroy our health. I can show you a million different cases of that the FDA approved, or
like in the pantry of most Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. How many kitchens still have Teflon pans in them? Yeah. When we've known for decades that, what Teflon does, as an example, and of course, tobacco industries, they finally came clean, but people became so accustomed to smoking cigarettes that was just something that they're like, all right, well, people want cigarettes. It's like, it's an addictive chemical, of course they want cigarettes.
So I want to leave people tuning in with two things. And one, I think, is the distinction, because this bridge requires thinking about things in a new way. It's why we're talking about and probably calling this like envisioning a new future, because in order to change something, we have to have a vision of like where we're going to some degree. It doesn't mean it's exactly how it's going to unfold, but we gotta be willing to think outside the box for something to change. Otherwise it's never going to change. And so one of the things that came up as you were talking in the past few minutes, you said something about people gaining power through wealth. And so one of the things that I think helps bridge these concepts is questioning. So allowing yourself to question, like, is it truly power that you want? Because we've been sold that power is what gets you happiness and everything you want. But I actually believe that it's influence. And so when you live in this type of place where you get to express your gifts, where you're being used at your potential, your influence increases, and that is worth far more than power in the end. And so possibly consider contemplating the relationship between power and influence, because I would choose influence every day. Even if it was local, like this conversation potentially influencing one person means more to me than having whatever proverbial power it is. And then go ahead.
No, I was going to say you nailed it, the nail right on the head. And we're seeing this in terms of social media influencers, because we've been able to monetize some of these influence. And I think that we have a moral obligation. And this is where we've suspended our faculties, in that we've used artificiality for a lot of these social media influencers to garner a large audience. Mm-hmm. Companies are leveraging that influence to peddle their products and services, some beneficial, some are not.
Right.
And this has created a conundrum, because now people who were not of privilege, individuals who don't have any special skill sets or education, are now social media influencers and are making incredible incomes, which has now told the rest of kids. I mean, you remember this with the athletes growing up, in our youth, we looked at who made the most money, and it was celebrities and athletes. So people, if you ask kids, they'd be like, well, I want to be a basketball player. I want to be a football player. I want to be an actor. I want to be a model, depending on, but now people are saying, well, this person didn't have to go to acting school. They never had all they did was use their cell phone, and they're now making just as much money as a celebrity. They never had to run. They never had to play football in high school or college. We just saw this in the rise of, what's his name? John Paul, I think his name was. The boxer that was the YouTube sensation, now organizing fights with professional boxers. Mm-hmm. And of course he's ridiculed, because they were like, hey, this is a person for which, never went, he just personally learned how to box, never had to get in the ring, never had to compete going up through the ranks, just went from zero to professional boxer because he called himself that. Mm-hmm. And he's arranging fights, and Mike Tyson defended him. He's like, listen, at the end of the day, we're all just entertainers. Mm-hmm. And that's all he's doing. And he's being paid to entertain. So whether it's right or wrong is really up to the individual. But we all have to look at that too, as far as our social media influencers. If we're going to feed that machine, we have to decide,
who are we giving influence to? Who do we want to give influence to? Because I hate that social media influencers are called influencers, because to me it perverts the definition of influence and what influence is supposed to be. And it's because it's this alternate version of how you can go from nothing to something and have more. And then they just turn around and they're selling you things that in some cases are completely unethical and that they don't believe in. And so it's almost a perversion of influence, and that drives me nuts. And so I think, as with anything, there's nuance in what that means, but the ethics behind how do we use our influence? I feel like that should be a primary question that I think we skip over quite a few times. So the second thing that I wanted to say, and what I wanted to end with, is you play a role in this. Anyone tuning in plays a role in how an alternate future plays out. And that's a really empowering place to be. It requires taking full responsibility for what is going on in your life. But it also is a huge opportunity to be like Chris, who is the grown version of a boy who looked up at the stars and was thinking outside the box. What if those stars had someone on it looking down back at me? And so tapping into your purpose is such a powerful thing because it highlights how you play a role in how this unfolds. And going from the place of doom and gloom in the beginning and things that we absolutely can't control, this is something that you absolutely can control. Your life, you can take full responsibility for it and start to ask yourself the tough questions around where do you want to give your money? In the meantime, where do you want to use your purchasing power? And how do you want to use your skills in the world? And in order to get there, I think sometimes we have to decondition and remember what our skills are. So what did you like doing as a kid? I love that Chris started this conversation with what he loved doing as a kid, because it's clearly led to how you view the world now, which I love. So what did you like doing as a kid? What was enjoyable to you? What did you find yourself loving? And there may be insights there into how you can tap into more of your gifts now. Chris, thank you so much for being here and envisioning alternate futures with me. It was a journey, but I loved it.
No, thank you. I know we covered a lot of ground and it was kind of all over the place, but yeah, I really hope that everybody, continues to listen to your show and garners more interest in just a better future for themselves.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here. And for those of you listening, thank you for tuning in, and I will see you next week. You've just finished listening to another episode of Make It Mentionable with me, your host, Alyssa Patmos. If you're looking for more in between episodes, then sign up for The Peel. It's my free newsletter that gives tips for how to navigate whatever life dishes. And it's also the place where I share the juiciest of stories. To check it out, head on over to alyssapatmos.com/The Peel. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.